Okay, so today we're going to talk about the div tag, and so it's how you get structure into your documents. So if you recall, our HTML shows up and it just keeps going to the right. Let me test this in a browser here real quick. Okay, so drag that to browser. Alright, so this business here, you see that it just flows to the right. HTML tags are default to display statically, and that just means that they stack and they grow according to the size of their parent. So we talked about that parent-child relationship last time, where the body tag is the parent of all this visible information, and that as it grows, the stuff stretches out or contracts. So that's where we left off last time. Okay, so that's just standard stuff. Some people still believe that this is the way to go, that a user should be able to decide how wide it is or how short it is, and there is a bit of that. It's called responsive design, where it'll acclimate towards the size that you want, but it's done in a more sophisticated way. It's done in a more designed way. So most designers hate this fact because most designers are control freaks. I want to do this. What do you think of that?
Make you feel better if I said over there?
Yeah, actually, that would be awesome. Because we work in like Page. We like a book. We like things decided, including the width and height of a document, right? Because there's a degree of control, and that's a big part of design. And so we want to create some structure, and we also want to create some division in the page so we can target it visually or just organizationally. So we do that with a generic tag called the div tag. So let's go ahead and use one here. So I'm going to go ahead and just type the I should say div element, and I'm going to create one just for, say, this, for the whole bit of content from here to there. I'm going to turn the wrap on here real quick. So that wraps. Okay, so this is a tag or an element just like any other element. Has an opening and a closing. Just like the H tag, just like the P tag, just like... I'm going to indent that in there so you can see that. So this div is now the parent of all the visible content. Make sense? Great. Okay, so let's save. As we recall, last time you put an H tag, it makes it bold. And you put a UL and it makes it indent and puts bullets. So remember that. Div tag has no visual effect by default. There are no default properties associated with the div tag. So it's a generic tag. It's like a white T-shirt that hasn't been printed over yet, right? It's just a blank T-shirt, and then you apply the graphics, do whatever you want to it. So it's just like that generic tag for to create a zone that there's not a tag already identified for that, right? Okay, so I've got that. Now, use a lot of divs. Use a div for every kind of structure that you want to create. Last time we talked about the metaphor of a closet. So closets have like the container, which is the body, and then they have shelves. And then inside there, they sometimes have cubby holes, or they have sub-shelves or subdivisions inside there. That is done with a div tag. You create all those divisions with a div tag. Okay? So there are many div tags. Just like there are many humans, there are 3 humans in here, and we're all identified by that humanity, right? We're all humans. but we're identified by other things, including our name, right? So that's how we decipher between our humanity tag, okay? So the div tag is really like the human tag. And so we get our names so we can decipher between each other or identify each other. So I'm going to put something in the opening of the tag. Does anybody remember what that's called? Something in the opening of a tag. Example is this href here. What are those called? href, rel, type. Those are all the same. This title is one of them. Remember what that's called? Okay, let's go to Chrome. Let's see if it says here. Okay, it's right here. HTML attributes are specified on the start tag. For example, the abbreviation, the ABBR element, which represents abbreviation, expects a title attribute in its opening tag. So those are known as attributes. Okay, so I'm going to use an attribute here so I can target that specifically. All right, so I'm going to say number sign. No, I'm not. I'm going to say ID equals, and then I'm going to name it. Often I'll name it shell or wrapper. And ID is just like a name tag, so it's an attribute that identifies that div tag, and it gives it a little name tag. Okay, so we do that because, as you recall last time, we are using CSS to manipulate the appearance of those tags, and traditionally we just specified the name of the tag, right? So let's say I wanted to create another division, like one for this zone here. So just the head here. Okay, so now this div is this parent of the h1. This has the same name as this, div. So I can't just create a selector for div because it'll target all the divs that I have on that page. I have to give each one a specific identifier, and more often than not I use the ID attribute, okay, for things that are specific that don't change. One rule of an ID is that you can only use it once per page, and you use it for big, broad, global things, like the wrapper of all the content, or the header of all the content, or the navigation, or the content part. Okay, so that's when you use an ID. So I'm going to call this ID header. All right, so let's go ahead and go here. Let's start down. Well, let's start above. So all these selectors in CSS are targeting various tags on the page and telling it to change its appearance or adjust its font size or its color. And these are known as type selectors, just identifying the name of the tag. This is identifying an ID attribute. So they're known as ID selectors, and they are specified by a number sign. So that's how it knows the difference between you are identifying an ID selector and you're just identifying a type tag. So I'm going to say number sign shell. Okay? And then let's give it a border of solid. So a solid border. Let's do black, which is 0, 0, 0, and then 1 pixel width. So I just specified a border, the width, the color, and the type. There's dotted, there's double line. Rarely use those. So let's go back to this, refresh, and now we've got a box around that. Okay, so I specified the div, the parent of all this content, and I just said put a border on that, and it did it. Okay, and notice the other div tag got left out. There's no other double line. All right, so let's go back up. Let's go ahead and work on that shell some more. Let's go ahead and say background color. I don't know. 333. So it's kind of a dark color. All right. And so we're getting a little structure here. A lot of times students will confuse the tag that we created, this kind of wrapper around everything that I've named shell, with the body tag. So don't do that. So if you look, the shell is this dark color, but the body tag is still there. It's still wrapping around absolutely everything, including that tag, and it's just called the body tag, and it's selected just how we did it. All right, so I'm going to create some distance between the content and the edge of this box. This is one of my pet peeves, so you must remember to do this. I cannot stand to see the content touching the side of the box. I hope it destroys you to look at it and see it touching, right? Because it should. Drives me nuts. Can't happen. It can't be there. So what's that? Do you remember that property that pushes outward from the edge of the box?
So the margin or padding, I'm not sure.
It's padding. So just think about, like, most people confuse those two, because in Word, margin pushes inward from the edge of the page, okay, right? But it's in reverse. So just think opposite of Word, right? So padding pushes inward. Yeah, there's a nice, awesome little thing on that book. So I'm going to put some on there. Padding 20 pixels. And so that puts some distance between that edge and that. Okay, so let's, more often than not, you'll see things centered. So let's go to Apple. Okay, so that's about what we're working with, but notice it kind of centers that page, right? Now it's continuing on here with the background, but notice the content is like a specific width that does not change. See that happening? So this content never goes past. This content here never goes past. This content never goes past that. It's not stretching, but the background is stretching. The images, the things that aren't content generated do. That centering is pretty easily done at this stage. There are 3 parts to this. First of all, it must have a specified width. Okay? So I'm going to bust out a width. So it must have a specified width. And I'm going to say 800 pixels. I'll save that. I'll refresh. And now it is 800 pixels. So it knows not to stretch back and forth because it's 800 pixels now. Used to be undefined, be as wide as my parent. Now I am 800 pixels wide. To get it to center, it's a bit of a trick. The force that pushes outward on 2 tags is what? We just talked about it. Margin. So margin pushes outward. So the force that's creating this distance between this button and this button is margin. The force that's creating the distance between this H and this H is margin, 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 margin. The things that are pushing away. Okay? Pushing inward is padding, pushing outward is margin. Alright, so we want to create a force that pushes outward, but we want that force to not be a number. Because if it's a number, it's just going to be 200, right? It's not going to fluidly adjust. So we're going to set that to auto. So margin, and I'm going to do right, auto, and margin left, auto. You can just do margin and specify 4 numbers, or you can say margin right, margin left, margin top, margin bottom, and that works for all all like padding does that, border does that, border right, border left.
The four numbers usually would follow the margin right or left. Is it? It's what's the order they go in?
I think it's
top right, bottom left.
that's correct. Top right, bottom
That's
left. Starts on the top and goes clockwise. Yeah. All right, so let's see if that worked, and it doesn't. So now that's acting like a nice page. Make sense?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we've created one. We've created kind of the inner closet. We say, okay, everything exists within this realm. Now, there's little conditions like I talked about responsive. And so there's ways, which we'll talk about in Web 2, to say, okay, stay a certain width and adjust as long as your browser is, say, 960. And then it gets past that and it starts to adjust and fluidly change the content based on the width. So that's the mobile, tablet, desktop. Okay? So there's ways of kind of creating that fluidity and still having rigidity. I think that's the most difficult part about, say, being an interactive designer versus a print designer, a graphic designer, is that a graphic designer generally thinks of kind of one term. Like, I'm going to make a book, and it's going to be this width by this height. Interactive designers have to think about, like, I'm going to create a scheme, and I'm going to figure out not only that scheme, but how it fluidity, like the fluidness of whether it's on the desktop, whether it's on a tablet, whether it's on the mobile device, and I'm going to make sure that all works together, unified. So often we design not in like set numbers, but in proportions. We say, okay, we want it to encompass half of the page or 2/3 of the page, regardless of the size of regardless of the size of the screen. Okay, so we're centering up here. And the div tag allowed us to do that. Now, all tags, I should say, are squares like this. For example, you can target this H tag and put a background color on it. And I recommend you do this if you're confused on like padding and margin and what's going on with that. So background color, and then I'm going to say, I don't know. I always choose an obnoxious color, so I don't leave it on there for no number sign for that. Yeah. Okay, so they are also boxes that you can give them a width, you can apply padding to them. So if I apply a padding to them, it'll create space between the red and the blue. You know, it'll create this space. If I put margin on it, it'll create space between those and the edge. It's just all the way around, right? So the margin is that invisible force field this way, and padding is the invisible force field. And all tags are these rectangles. They have 4 sides, and as soon as you can start thinking of them like that, you can start manipulating them pretty easily. Okay, so let's just take off those things because those are obnoxious. So we'll say save. All right. So in terms of shelf and things like that, let's say I want to create I can target this header, and I do it the same way. I'm targeting this ID attribute. So when I'm doing that, I just give it a number sign to represent ID and then just say header. So my CSS number sign header. Okay. And let's give this a background color. .555. Yeah. All right, and then some padding. Now it's starting to look like a website, right? Now, rule of thumb, regardless of whether you can see the division or not, you should have a division. All right, just like a closet. You have your closet, and then you have several shelves, and that bar goes all the way across. Also, you know, it shouldn't just be an open, vacant closet that you just throw stuff in. You got hangers and stuff to hang up. Imagine how inefficient a closet would be without shelves and a bar to hang your clothes on. So this is a pet peeve of mine too. For every section, if you divide, like we're dividing the shell into one, we should finish out the other sections, regardless if you see them. So it'll become clear as time goes on. Hey, bud. So we're going to go, navigation is always a typical area to target. So I'm going to say div. And then I want the title and the bit there. Okay, and I'm going to give that an ID attribute of navigation or nav. Put that there. So number sign nav. So let's just go ahead and copy that. Any questions so far? All right, too much padding. All right, looks good here. We should probably have as much we should have as much here as there. Just standard alignment principle. Yeah. Does it bother anyone that this is kinked over here?
Couldn't you do with the second box? Can't you do side, like specify a padding on which side too?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll do that. So we said top, right, and then I'll just copy these two, bottom and left. Yeah, for sure. We see this little gap. It's created by the margin that's on top of that. So you can fix it two ways. You can take the margin off of this H2, or you can just put some padding, which there should be anyway. So instead of 0, we'll say 10 and 10. That's crazy too much. Let's say 5. Let's say 0. Yeah, what's going on there is, like, I think this is an unordered list like we talked about. It's here and it has a bottom margin of 30, and so that's what's doing that. So we'll just take that off. And that's why I was doing that. So if it's reacting like that, we just remember that all these things have boxes and they all have margin properties, and some of them are default, like all the H tags have default top and bottom, all the P's have top and bottom margin, all the ULs have top and bottom margin. So sometimes they create these little cracks and things that you just need to zero them out. A practice that you'll see, and I do this pretty often, is that you can target every tag by just saying asterisk, and then you could just say, okay, every tag I want bottom margin, or top, to be 0. And then no tag will have a top margin.
So asterisk is for everything on the HTML list, not just
everything.
letter
Yeah.
tags?
Yeah, absolutely everything. And I do that pretty frequently because I like to just go one way, and I always go top down. It's very kind of a top down thing. Whenever you have a problem with a website or something that we're working on, I always start from the top down. I always kind of check all the tags from the out to the in, and then I always start with the top and keep going down and checking down for problems and things like that. And so I like things to push down. I like one number as opposed to two numbers to worry about. And often when you're first working, you'll set a top margin on one and then a bottom margin on the other, and then you're trying to figure things out. You know what I mean? If you zero out one of those options, then you got one less thing to worry about. So I try to do that. Okay, so we've got that settled. And then, so we're just using the magic of the div tag here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that and change this to, I'm going to say content. These can be called whatever you like. I ask that you consider, sorry about that, making them contextual, like they are defining the things that they are surrounding in a global way. If you get too specific, like if you say, like, let's say there's a picture of an image and you want to wrap a div tag around it, I would call it like image box. Some people go so far to say is like, that's a picture of a car, right? I think that's too specific, because you might use that same structure on a different page, and inside that might not be a picture of a car. It might be a picture of a bird, but works exactly the same way. So you want to name your IDs pretty general, but specific to the type of content that's in there. So I just called this content. You can call them anything you want, just no special characters, no spaces. Okay? You can give something two IDs, and you do that by putting a space. And so if you put a space there, it thinks you're defining two ID attributes. Okay, so we'll call this content. So number sign content. Use the same bit here. Now we got a website. Pretty much. Alright, so we got two pages. We got this about page and contact page. Yep.
Link broken on the about page?
Looks like probably this one's not connected to the CSS page, and it looks like there's some elements missing on this page. Okay, so let's just do them one at a time. I'll just go to the about page, and I'll open up the about page, and I'll target my thinking on the about page. Many times when a student's having difficulty with this, they have trouble just focusing on one thing, because you're just naturally to think about not only the one thing that's going wrong in your life, but you tend to think about everything that's going wrong in your life. You know what I mean? You think about like, oh gosh, I have this problem, but then you think about, oh well, I'm going broke, and like, oh, this happened when I was a kid. I mean, it just piles on, right? But in reality, if you just forget that other stuff, the problem at hand, the problem in front of your face is probably easier to solve. So forget all the other stuff. There's two problems that are going on. Let's just focus on one of them, and we're just going to work on the about page. So if we look, there's just no connection to that CSS page. And that always happens in the head, and it's represented by a link tag. I don't even have to remember it, because I know it's in the index. I know they live in the same directory or folder, so I'll just copy and paste that link, put that in the head, save and test. And so now we're connected that way. Notice that there's no structure. Can anybody tell me why?
There's no div tags in the about content.
Yeah, no div tags. So that the CSS traverses page by page, but I only edited one page, the index page, and I actually put content in there. I actually put tags in there. So I have to actually do that to the rest of the pages. Normally, I'll set one up and I'll use that as the template for the rest of the website. So if I look, I've got one that's wrapped around everything. It's called the shell. So I'm going to copy that, go to the about, and make sure I'm doing this as consciously as possible. Sometimes we get a little too sloppy when we're copying and pasting because we've just done it so much in our lives that we just assume that we're doing it correctly when we are not. So that's just a caution. So inside the body tag, nothing should be outside the body tag. Sorry, that's a different software that does that. Okay, and I like to tab in. And notice I tabbed in everything at the same time.
How do you do that?
Command, bracket, left and right. And you see at the text in the text menu item is turning blue when I do that. It's up here. Shift cells left and right, command bracket. So there's all these kind of cool things in there that you can do. Make your life easier. So now I have that shell inside there, and I'm just going to do one at a time. Save, refresh my browser, go to about, and so now I have that one bit. A lot of times this happens where students will kind of get that, and then they'll just start moving and just kind of lose consciousness. So you got to keep your head in game still. We're going to copy and paste that header. And so that header goes here, and so this inevitably happens. We'll just get the nesting a little wrong, and we'll kind of lose sight of the compare and contrast, right? I think the theory is, like, it's happened so much that you kind of, as a teacher, develop theories of what goes on in students' minds. And I think the theory on my end is that we're so used to the computer doing a lot of that business for us that we're kind of in this, like, less than conscious mode when we're using the computer, because it handles, like, the emails, you don't have to know where the files are located. You don't have to know fancy commands. You're just used to it just putting it where it belongs. And so you don't have to be, like, hyper engaged when you're using the computer most of the time. And then, you know, Photoshop was difficult, but not terribly difficult. And then once you got all the kind of the way it works, then you're just right on. You know what I'm saying? It's like second nature, and you don't have to think about it anymore. This is one of the things where you just have to discipline yourself to really think about it, because even simple things, like you can see, like navigation is here, but in the about page it's inside this. It seems like a lot of times with this stuff, it's technical, and so students kind of seem a little blind from really the obvious, right? It's obvious that this is wrapped around that, right? So it should be no mystery. It should be no, you know, not a scary thing. You just go in here and just put the closer around the right content, and now it's in the right spot. Okay, so so we got a nav and a content. So nav starts here. You can even put double spaces. That does nothing, so it's not a big deal. And content. You know, any way that makes it clear to you, I would do. Content. There are no rules in terms of formatting. Sorry about that. Don't forget that div there. All right. Okay, so we got our sections. So closet, kind of inside closet, shelf, shelf, and then the open area where we're hanging all our clothes. Yep. All right. So contact doesn't work that way. What I like to do in this scenario, since I've got this worked out, that's a lot of work. So I like to be as clever as possible, because I'm a clever dude. That's why I'm super high-paid professor. So I'm going to copy this contact into another directory. And I'm going to take one that's complete, do file save as, and write it over the old version. Contact. Now I'm going to, because I have all those div tags, so it's easier for me just to open up the old contact here and just get the right information, which the only thing that's changed is this content. So copy, close that so it doesn't confuse me. Come in here and paste, and so that made my life a little bit easier. It looks like I got 2 of those. And now contact should be correct too as well. Alright. So I love doing that stuff. I'll waste a lot of time trying to figure out how to do it that way rather than doing it copy and paste, because my mind doesn't like that kind of drudge work. It likes to figure out tricky ways of doing drudge work. By all means, do what you want. I'll delete that so it doesn't get in the way. Alright, notice that this is inline, displaying side by side. Display inline means to be fluid, to have no structure. It means to flow like a snake. Okay? An example of it would be, say, this paragraph, the content of the paragraph. These don't stack, like words don't stack like boxes. They go side by side, right? But this paragraph is a box, and this paragraph is a box, and they stack. This H1 is a box, and it stacks with this P, and this P stacks with this P, because they're all represented as boxes. Words are inline elements, meaning they just go side by side. An anchor tag, which is what? Does anybody remember what an anchor is? anchor tag? What does it do? Here's one.
It's a hyperlink.
It's hyperlink. Yeah, it defines hyperlink. So I'm going to put an anchor tag here, a href, and those are known as attributes. And then I'm just going to put http / www.google.com, and then I'm going to /a there. Okay, so you see that did not stack, right? Because it's displaying inline and just flows like a... So A is one of those tags that are inline elements. There are fewer inline elements than there are block elements, which stack like boxes. Okay?
So hyperlinks are displayed as an orange. And
Yeah.
then you got the A, what is it, A : hover, something like that.
Yeah.
And like that's the, okay.
Yeah, those are known as pseudo classes, and there are very few tags that have that : hover as well. There are 4 states of that A selector, right? So A has like 4 states that you can define, but there are very few tags that have multiple states. Does that make sense? Okay, and this is known as inline when it just flows like water rather than stacks like a box. Okay, and block is when they just stack like boxes. Div tags are display block. Most tags are display block. Okay, so the reason I say that is because notice that this is a list, correct?
Yep.
Because any more than 2 elements or 1 elements is a list. So there are 2. This is a list of things that you can click. So it should be defined in an unordered list, which it is. Here's the UL and here the LI. Here are the elements of that list. There is also a list on contact, but unfortunately it's displaying inline as well. Probably shouldn't be side by side. These can be side by side because they're nav elements and often you see them that way, but these aren't. However, we selected them just by using the type tag, the UL and the LI. Alright, so it says display inline, and so any LI in the page will display inline, including the ones here. So what happens when you want these to display inline but these you do not want to? Does that make sense? So that's the problem that we want to solve. We want these to display inline, we want these to not. So you could go and you say, okay, well, I could just take this off. I could say display block. But then we have the opposite. I want these side by side and these to be stacked. Okay? So what you can do is you can specify, you can create a type attribute just like this, right? But rather than just using the generic type, you can specify what zone it lives in. We zoned it out. So div tags also not only provide structure, they provide zones. And so sometimes you don't want to visually change it, but you want to zone it out to a specific area. You want to say this area is the navigation. And so you can use a div tag for that. You know, so even if you don't want it to be, you just want it to be floating the page, you just want it to be a clear background, it's still best to zone things out. Okay? So to specify an LI tag that lives in something, you create something called a contextual selector. So you just specify what zone it lives in. So we're going to still manipulate these LI tags, but I only want the LI tags that live in this zone. So what zone does this live in?
Navigation.
Yeah, this nav. Right? So its parent is the nav, and so I could just say, hey, only LIs with a parent of $, nav. Make sense? Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. And you just specify LI tags inside their parents by just specifying their parent first and then a space. So we're still selecting that LI, but only LIs inside that nav. So I'll say save and I'll say refresh. And so now these are stacked and these are not, because I've manipulated these because they're inside a zone. These are not in that zone. So let's put the bullets back. The bullets are being taken off by this UL. So I'm just going to specify the parent inside the nav. And the bullets are back. So those are contextual. So like this right here. This is an H1 and that is an H1, I think. So if you want this H1 to look different, you just specify the zone it lives in first. Okay, so here's the H1 and then here's the H1. So if I want this to look different, let's say a different color, how would I specify it?
H1 content.
Yes, except it's reversed. So number sign, content, specify. You always go in order, outward in. So you specify the parent, and then you go inward. Does that make sense? So parent first, then the tag that you want to manipulate, H1, and then just say size 10 pixels, which is pretty small. Did that wrong. It is font size. There you go. Teeny tiny. Okay. Notice they're both blue, right? So I didn't change the blue because it is an H1, and so we want the font weight to be normal, and we want it to be blue, and we want anything inside content to be 10 pixels or 15 pixels. Okay, so some you can make generic. You say, I want all the H tags to be blue, but I want this one to be 12 and this one to be 13. And so you can make multiple selectors. It doesn't matter. It always prioritizes the one at the underneath. So if I move this, where's that first H1? So now this is on top of that H1. Didn't change. All right, that's cool. That's cool. I was wanting to demonstrate something. Let's do this first. Okay. So this selects all the H1 tags and makes them 15, but this one will override that one. I took the context off, so that one's overriding the other one. But with the context, it looks like it keeps it in order. I like to do all my contextual things in the same kind of group here, just to keep my mind in order. You know, this is an organization game as much as it is a design game or a tech game. It's like if you keep things together, they're easier to edit and change. Questions on that? So div tags a lot of power in that. We talked about the ID selector, which uses a number sign, and it's not identifying a tag. It's identifying a tag with an ID attribute. Common misconception, because we do this lab and we identify so many tags with ID attributes, that a lot of students see them as the same thing. They'll say the shell tag. There is no shell tag in here, and I will get upset. I will not let you say that. It's not the shell tag. It's a div tag with an ID attribute shell. Okay? And the reason that is because if it's a shell tag, a lot of students will forget that number sign. They'll forget what's happening, and it makes it harder for them to figure it out in the future. It makes it harder for them to troubleshoot and all that stuff because they assume that that's a shell tag.
The number signs are reserved only for divs.
That's not true.
Okay.
Only reserved for any tag with the ID attribute.
Okay.
Okay? So other tags can have ID attributes. So that's the other second misconception, that they're only used for divs, and that's not true. They're commonly used for divs because divs don't have any other way of identifying themselves because there's the same tag that you use over and over again. But you can specify, like say this UL. You can say, you can give this an attribute of like ID equals, nav list. No spaces, no special characters. And I could target this UL specific from any other tag just by using that nav list. So number sign nav list. So this one's the only one with the ID attribute. So any tag can have an ID attribute. All right? Excellent question. All right. It's about 45 minutes. Let's break for a few and we'll